It's the night of April 14th, 1912 in the North Atlantic. 20 minutes past midnight. On board the passenger liner Carpathia, one cabin still has its lights on, the radio operator's cabin. He has just received a message from a sinking ship. But it isn't just any ship. It's the Titanic.
The radio operator is a little panicked. He asks him to repeat, which we all would have done.
A distress call from the Titanic is something he certainly never expected to receive in his career.
The officer doesn't really believe him. Why would he? The Titanic is unsinkable.
So how did the unsinkable ship sink? We think we know all there is to know about the sinking of the Titanic, but a technical analysis of the disaster reveals some gray areas. Why did the Titanic set sail from Southampton while a fire was burning in one of her holds?
The biggest problem is that the coal bunker is already full and the fire is at the very bottom of it.
Was Captain Smith really the right man for the job?
He is getting quite old, reaching the end of his career, so there's questions about whether perhaps he is losing his touch at this stage.
With all the security measures in place, why did the breaches prove fatal?
Titanic suffers damage that even a modern-day cruise ship or later passenger liners aren't able to cope with.
How could the liner have continued sailing despite the collision?
Everything would have been different if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head-on.
What would one do if you were in the same situation? You see a rabbit or a cat or a dog in front of you, your instinct is to swerve out of the way.
To answer these questions, we visited Southampton, Toulon, Belfast, and London. We met some of the world's leading maritime specialists, historians, engineers, and collectors. But also the man who, alongside his team, found the wreck of the Titanic.
To find it, we all had to be the best at what we do. We hit the jackpot in a matter of minutes.
A minute-by-minute story of the Titanic. An incredible chain of events that led to an out-of-control catastrophe. The North Atlantic, August 1985. For nearly 6 weeks, a Franco-American mission has had just one objective: to succeed where everyone else has failed and find the Titanic.
This wreck had become the Himalayas of scuba diving.
Jean-Louis Michel is an engineer at the French Research Institute for Exploitation of the Sea. He is in charge of the mission on the French side. On September 1st, 1985, at 1 a.m., he was on duty on the ship of the other mission leader, the American Robert Ballard. And after 6 weeks of searching without success, Jean-Louis Michel noticed something strange on his screens.
I saw a dark change in texture. I saw bright spots. I hadn't been drinking. That's when we said, there it is. And at one point, we see something on our screen, which is 4 meters in diameter. A meter high, it was a boiler from the Titanic. We hit the jackpot in a matter of minutes.
73 years after she sank, the Titanic has finally been found. It sank in 2 parts at a depth of 3,800 meters. The French submarine Nautil carried out a total of 164 dives on the wreck. They shed light on the conditions surrounding the sinking of the Titanic.
We finally found out just how much damage was inflicted on the Titanic. For a long time, it was imagined that the Titanic had been opened like a tin can over a great distance.
We had hoped to find the cracks, but as it was buried in sediment, we couldn't see the area that had been weakened by the iceberg.
sonar was needed to discover the damage created by the iceberg. And incredibly, the breaches represent little more than a square meter, the surface area of a closet door. This discovery allows us to retrace the tragic night when the largest, most luxurious, and safest ocean liner of all time was lost. To get a better understanding of how an iceberg could sink a ship deemed unsinkable, we must go back 73 years. Wednesday, April 10th, 1912. A landmark day in maritime history. The biggest boat ever to set sail from Southampton in southern England. For several months, the owner of the Titanic, White Star Line, announces the launch of its new cruise liner with a great deal of publicity. Its dimensions are certainly impressive. 269 meters in length, equivalent to almost 3 soccer pitches, and over 28 meters wide. The boat has 11 decks, 4 42-meter funnels, and 64-meter masts. A total of 46,000 tons, equivalent to almost 5 times the weight of the Eiffel Tower.
It's a very impressive ship too, standing as tall as a 30-story building. It's an extremely large ship, which will tower above everything else in the docks. So it's already an attraction from that point of view.
But the boat is so big that it's going to be very complicated to maneuver, to the point of risking an accident right from the start. The time is 12:14. It's time for the Titanic to set sail. People flock to the decks of the ship and to Dock 44 to say goodbye or simply to witness this historic moment. In the wheelhouse, where the captain is stationed, the ship is maneuvered to leave the port. And it's far from easy because on this particular day in Southampton, there are more ships than usual.
Titanic leaves her berth at Southampton. Because of the coal strike, a number of ships are laid up at Southampton, so she's certainly being cautious.
The Titanic begins to move, but it's so powerful that when those propellers start moving, it creates this totally unforeseen and uncontrollable force of suction.
She passes in front of a rather large liner. People thought it was a small liner, but it was actually really large, the New York.
And the suction from the vortex created in the water by the propellers, and she's dragged towards the Titanic.
The eddies generated by its movement in the water make one of the New York's mooring lines roll away.
So New York's stern is drifting out towards Titanic.
The Titanic tries to turn back as a tugboat pulls the New York away.
In the end, the two ships are separated by less than a meter.
And it is only by the narrowest of margins that a collision is averted.
Many passengers are on deck at the time of departure. Many of them witness the situation, and it doesn't reassure them.
Many people later saw this event as an omen of doom for the Titanic.
Un présage funeste sur le destin du Titanic.
After this near miss, some people are starting to ask questions. Questions arise about the man at the helm of the Titanic, Captain Smith, a true star in the maritime world.
He's had a brilliant career and is a truly accomplished sailor.
Captain Smith is the Commodore of the White Star Line. He was considered to be one of the most famous ship captains in the history of modern steam navigation.
He was probably one of the most experienced and knowledgeable men in the North Atlantic.
He was the most famous sailor of his time, to such an extent that some first-class passengers would only travel on ships commanded by Captain Smith.
But after the collision with the New York, questions are being asked. It's well known that Smith had a similar accident with the Titanic's twin ship, the Olympic.
In the months leading up to the Titanic's maiden voyage, the Olympic had an accident with a Royal Navy cruiser.
Is Captain Smith really the right man for the job?
He is getting quite old and reaching the end of his career. He's thinking about retiring, after this trip. So there's questions about whether perhaps he is losing his touch at this stage.
Nobody is used to ships this big. These are the biggest ship in existence.
The novelty of the Olympic and the Titanic is that they are ships of unprecedented size. So, many people question the seaworthiness of these boats. And it's a big challenge for Captain Smith to prove that these ships are on a human scale.
Smith's other challenge is to ensure the safety of his passengers. But there's a threat lurking in the depths of the Titanic. Incredible as it may seem, since the boat was launched, a fire has been burning on board, and it's kept a secret. Only some of the crew are aware. It started in the moment of departure because of a coal miner's strike. Supplies had to be bought from other ships.
Coal, when it gets damp, particularly coal that gets aerated by moving it from one ship to another, was actually, in regulations, was actually really warned that you shouldn't do that. But of course the White Star Line had no choice. They were desperately short of coal, and they certainly didn't want to cancel the sailing of the Titanic.
But this operation to enable the Titanic to leave on time was not without consequences.
And that also resulted in a problem with the coal in the bunkers, where the coal became heated in one of the bunkers. Spontaneous combustion took place and a fire started to rage in one of our coal bunkers.
When we talk about a fire in a coal bunker, it's more like embers. When the coal is used, it rises to a very high temperature, but without necessarily producing flames. It's more like smoke.
Now cruising in the middle of the Atlantic, the Titanic is still under threat from a fire. Gérard Piouffe is a maritime historian specializing in the Titanic. As he explains, putting out a fire in a cargo hold is particularly tricky.
Coal bunkers are generally filled from the top and emptied from the bottom. And what you need to do is get to the source of the fire as quickly as possible.
The biggest problem is that the bunker's already full and the fire is at the very bottom of it. So to turn it off, you have to empty the cargo hold. But you can't do that without moving the ship forward.
Before putting an end to the fire, the mechanics must keep it under control at all costs. They monitor the pressure and the temperature and send the steam out. In the end, the fire was extinguished on Saturday, April 13th, the eve of what would be the Titanic's very last day. Sunday, April 14th, 1912. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. Passengers are waking up slowly. Little do they know that this day will be remembered for a long time to come. After taking on passengers in Cherbourg, France, then Queenstown, Ireland, the Titanic is now sailing in the middle of the Atlantic. On board, the 1,300 passengers are impressed by the luxury. Nearly 900 people are needed to operate this floating palace.
Titanic is the most prestigious ship afloat at the time she makes her maiden voyage.
The boat is divided into 3 classes. It's no coincidence that the first classes are in the center.
If you're at the bow of the stern, you can feel the motion of the ship somewhat more than if you're amidships. And if you're at the stern as well, for example, near the propellers, you're more likely to feel any vibrations that are coming from the propellers and the propelling machinery.
On board, everything is designed to make the Titanic the most luxurious liner. Mark Churnside is a maritime expert who has written a dozen books on transatlantic shipping.
So in first class, they introduce a host of new features which are simply not available to passengers on other ships. So for example, first class passengers have the use of a gymnasium, they have the use of a squash court, swimming pool, Turkish and electric baths. They have an extra tariff restaurant, a reception room alongside the first-class dining saloon.
Housed in the less prestigious parts of the Titanic, the majority of the third class were emigrating to New York, a land of hope for many Europeans.
It's important to remember that this was before the First World War. Thousands of people left Europe every year to settle in the United States in search of a better life and better living and working conditions, and maritime companies based their growth mainly on this trade.
But in that year, It was the first time that 1 million passengers, immigrant passengers, crossed from the old world to the new world.
And this distribution of different classes would play a major role in the disaster. 1 p.m. After a 4-day crossing, Captain Smith took full advantage of the Titanic's technical capabilities.
Captain Smith is delighted. The boat is going well, and every day she's going a little bit faster. Starts up at 20.5 knots, and the next day she goes at 21.5. As you would, it's your new ship, you want to see how well she goes, and everything's running fine, so you push it a little bit harder.
The signs are that she's set for a successful voyage. The passengers and crew are pleased with her performance. She handles the sea very well, and there is a lot of gossip on board that she'll be able to arrive in New York earlier than they expected.
In fact, betting on the boat's performance has become one of the passengers' favorite pastimes.
They spend time sometimes gambling on the ship's run. It's quite popular each day when the number of miles is posted that the person who has guessed to the nearest mile is going to be the beneficiary of the money that they've put in.
At high speed, the Titanic is closing in on its tragic fate.
No one could imagine that on the floating city of luxury that was the Titanic. An incredible tragedy was about to take place just a few hours later.
3 p.m. In the radio booth, more and more iceberg warning messages.
The Titanic receives ice warnings on its first day on the high seas from ships going in the opposite direction. And she receives more and more as she makes her way to New York.
But at the time, for radio, safety was not at all a priority.
The two wireless men on board, Jack Phillips, Harold Bride, they are not employed by White Star, they're employed by Marconi, and their job is simply to send and receive passenger telegrams.
Phillips and Harold Bride, who were two people at the cutting edge of progress. Today, they're brilliant computer scientists who form a world of their own.
It's a world apart because their only job is to place stock market orders or send courtesy messages.
At the time of the Titanic, it was considered a kind of toy of technology, which was used mainly to transmit passengers' personal messages.
And is on board ships like Titanic at this point as much as an attraction for the passengers. It's there pretty much like the gymnasium or the swimming pool.
Jack Phillips communicates some of the warning messages to the captain, but others are never forwarded.
There was no legal requirement for it. There is no need for sending messages. And of course, if a wireless crew is very busy, technically there is no onus on them to actually forward messages.
In particular, there are 3 dispatches from 3 liners. I'm talking about the America, the Mesaba, and the Californian. All of them sent her dispatches that say, beware, ice, beware, on your route, right in front of you, there are icebergs. The last message in particular was never transmitted to the wheelhouse.
Famously, when the Californian sends a message warning of ice in Titanic's vicinity, because of the closeness of Titanic to the Californian, it blares in Phillips' ears and interrupts the message he was sending. Phillips crossly replies, "Shut up, keep out, I'm busy, I'm working Cape Race." It should be remembered that these are young people and they're using what we would now effectively call text speak. They are the original texters of their day.
However, some of these messages indicate the exact location of the iceberg that will seal the Titanic's fate in a matter of hours. "5 p.m. Captain Smith is aware of a few warning messages, but he makes a decision that may seem surprising. The Titanic must not slow down.
He knew that the ice was lying in the track, approximately in the track that the Titanic was taking, and he took a calculated decision that he would get up to the ice, he would see the ice in time, and either slow down or navigate around the ice.
We all now think Titanic going full speed into an iceberg is almost an act of lunacy. It makes no sense. And of course, since Titanic, this is perfectly logical. But 1912, travelling at speed in ice, this is standard practice. Every captain does this. It may seem a fallacy now, but the idea was very simple. The less time you're among icebergs, the less time there is for something to go wrong. So Titanic travelling at full speed is perfectly ordinary.
It's not a mistake. You have to remember that in 1912, there hadn't been a serious accident of such catastrophic proportions on the Atlantic in living memory. The last serious accident involving a passenger liner striking an iceberg was in the 1870s.
So even in the event of an accident involving ice, there should be no problem. Many less precise, less sophisticated, less prestigious ships have survived collisions with icebergs without a hitch.
At the time, icebergs were very common in the North Atlantic, so to avoid hitting them, ships had to follow a very specific route.
The Atlantic is a major highway at this time. What with all the ships, commerce, etc., this is the only way to cross. There's various official shipping routes as a direct result, a northern and a southern route in particular.
The northern route, the most direct, is used from mid-August to mid-January. The southern route bypasses the ice fields for the rest of the year. This is the course the Titanic must follow. But the winter of 1912 was no ordinary winter.
It had been a fairly mild winter, which resulted in more ice melting in the north and therefore more icebergs in the North Atlantic that move a little further south before melting.
Icebergs are in the Atlantic later in the year, in spring, which was quite a rare phenomenon. This explains Captain Smith's choice of a route slightly further south than the ship's usual route, which is a road used mainly during the ice season, but rarely at this time of year.
9 p.m. Before retiring to his cabin, Captain Smith gave orders to slow down in the event of any danger. All responsibility now rests on two men. 30 meters above sea level, in their crow's nest, two men are in charge of the ship's safety. It's the lookout, their mission, to spot any obstacle in the Titanic's path.
The two men on watch at the time of the collision were Frederick Flitt and Reginald Lee, two seasoned sailors with extensive experience in this field. They'd handled this kind of mission before.
And tonight, despite the bitter cold, the weather conditions appear good for the lookout.
The sea is calm, it's bitingly cold.
We've got excellent visibility and superb weather. Not a cloud in the sky, nobody's worried.
And yet, contrary to what you might think, a calm sea is actually a sign of danger.
In order to see icebergs, you need waves. You need motion in the sea. If you don't have motion, you can't see any waves breaking around the icebergs.
The simple fact is that that flat, dead calm and the breaking of the water that you would normally expect at the base of an iceberg wasn't there. Those little telltales that would warn you that something was ahead, or at least in time, wasn't there.
An invisible obstacle is the exact danger that is looming just a few hundred meters from the Titanic. The two men on the lookout are yet to spot the mountain of ice that the liner and its 2,200 occupants are approaching. It was at 11:39 p.m. that everything changed.
Looking out into the night, keeping a close eye, and eventually Fleet spots a dark shape on the horizon.
He sees something black, he's wondering what it is, and then it hits him. It's an iceberg.
As Fleet saw the iceberg, his instinct was to ring the bell.
Immediately, he rings 3 bells to signal that there's something ahead.
Picks up the phone to the bridge.
The man who picks up the phone is Officer Murdoch. Tonight, he is replacing Captain Smith at the helm of the Titanic.
What did you see? Iceberg right ahead.
Iceberg dead ahead. Hard to port, please. Hard to port, aye.
The officer knows he has only 30 seconds to try to avoid the iceberg.
Murdoch orders hard to port, meaning they would try to pass on the port side, on the left, thinking they could avoid the obstacle.
The Titanic tries to get around the iceberg on the left. But the 46,000-ton steel structure is not easy to maneuver. Murdoch then tried to slow down.
And rings for the engines all stop. Standard procedure at that time.
After receiving the order, it takes several long seconds for the mechanics to stop the machines. Seconds that make all the difference.
The problem is that the Titanic is a huge ship, that there's a certain force of inertia, and that the rudder is quite small for a ship of this size.
Worse still, the shutdown of the machines sets off a chain reaction that Murdoch hadn't anticipated. During operation, the central propeller constantly propels water over the rudder, increasing the ship's reaction time. But by stopping the propellers, everything slows down. It takes almost 30 seconds for the liner to start moving, an eternity in the face of such an obstacle.
For several long seconds, Murdoch is fixed to the helm. The ship isn't moving, it isn't moving. At the very last moment, she turns off to the port side.
At that moment, the Titanic was nothing more than an uncontrollable monster of steel hurtling towards this mountain of ice at nearly 40 kilometers per hour.
There's very much a hope that they will avoid the iceberg. However, as the ship gets closer and closer, it becomes more and more clear that she is going to hit the iceberg.
The collision lasts only a few seconds. And it's underwater that the damage is most severe. Because as the iceberg hits the Titanic, it buckles the steel plates of the hull one by one. Some of the rivets are ejected under the pressure. The water then gradually seeps into the front bunkers.
The first boiler compartments at the front of the ship, where the stokers work, were flooded immediately.
These mechanics were among the first victims. But 30 meters above, in the wheelhouse, Officer Murdoch is far from worried. He wasn't aware of anything.
Murdoch says it was a close call. We got away with some dents, a few paint scratches, but everything's fine. We're safe.
The officer is this confident because he believes he's at the helm of an unsinkable ship. To understand this, we need to go back to the very conception of the Titanic.
The Shipbuilder Journal of 1911, the preeminent journal, stated that the ship was practically unsinkable. The press read this and dropped the word practically, and so of course a legend was born.
The Titanic earned its reputation thanks to a number of technical innovations.
The engineers tried to foresee any possible accidents. We always try to imagine the worst.
First of all, the bottom of the ship had been doubled.
In other words, it can brush against, or it could possibly hit without the slightest issue.
But above all, the Titanic was designed to be able to hit an obstacle without endangering itself. The principle is simple. The hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments.
It's a system that already existed, but the Titanic perfects it to a new level.
In the event of flooding, the water cannot spread to the whole ship. It is confined to the affected compartments.
Titanic had a remarkable system with her bulkheads. She was designed so that if the first 4 compartments were flooded, the ship was safe. This is in a time when one compartment flooded usually would sink a ship.
Doors allow you to move from one compartment to another, but in the event of damage, there is no way that water can get through them. A third innovation, watertight doors.
Ships had watertight doors before this period. They were a known and accepted technology, but they almost invariably had to be operated by hand. If there was a problem, you had to wind them down.
On the Titanic, these doors were also electronically remote controlled. and even automatically. Paul Loudon Brown was James Cameron's historical advisor on the film Titanic. For him, this triple safety system is an incredible innovation.
If there weren't anybody around, a special float, like a ball cock in a lavatory, would rise up as the water level rose up, and this would trigger a release valve and the door would close automatically. So you had a triple redundancy: an electrical switch to close the door, a manual switch to close the door, and eventually an automatic switch that would sense that the water was rising. This again was a very special, unique feature fitted into the Titanic.
Within seconds of the collision, Officer Murdoch ordered the watertight doors closed. For him, at that moment, it was certain that even if the iceberg had punctured the hull, the liner would stay afloat. What he doesn't know is that the damage caused is far more serious. "11:45 p.m. On board the Titanic, almost nobody felt the collision, and almost nobody suspected the drama that was about to unfold.
Many passengers who were still up treated it as a bit of a diversion. This was something out of the ordinary for a transatlantic crossing, and they went on deck to see what had happened.
Captain Smith arrives, alerted by the vibrations of the collision.
Just then, Smith arrives in the wheelhouse. What happened?
Murdoch replies that they've struck an iceberg, and he also tells Captain Smith that he's ordered the ship's watertight doors to be closed.
The Titanic seems to be doing well, but Captain Smith wants to know for sure. He then entrusts a mission to the man who knows the Titanic best, Thomas Andrews.
The Titanic's main designer was Thomas Andrews. He is the chief architect of the Harland and Wolff shipyard.
Jean-Philippe Marr is an architect and Titanic expert. He is the author of a biography of Thomas Andrews.
He is the one coordinating the teams who design the ship, and the teams building it on site, too.
When Captain Smith comes to the bridge, he sends someone down to the bilges to check, down to the lower decks to check the condition of the hull.
And what Thomas Andrews sees will make his blood run cold. If the Titanic designer's observations are correct, 5 compartments are affected. Worse still, Thomas Andrews realized that the bulkheads were not high enough. Like a set of communicating bases, water will flow from one compartment to another.
So you have this amazing piece of technology, and yet it's in a wall that's got a space above it. There's a great paradox.
The extent of the flooding overwhelms Titanic's watertight compartments. Titanic suffers damage that even a modern-day cruise ship or later passenger liners aren't able to cope with.
Thomas Andrews must come to a conclusion.
He makes his calculations and realizes that his ship is doomed, despite being the safest ship in the world.
The designer of the Titanic must inform the captain immediately.
Thomas Andrews is seen running up the ship's staircase with what one passenger describes as a look of terror on his face.
Thomas Andrews arrives at the wheelhouse and says, "The ship is going to sink. We've got an hour and a half, 2 hours maximum."
5 minutes past midnight. The Titanic is leaning slightly to the right. In the holds, some passengers have already drowned.
It becomes clear that Titanic is badly damaged. She is taken on a list of 5 degrees to starboard, which is clear evidence that she's taking on water.
There's already too much water coming in to ensure the vessel's long-term stability.
Of course, the weight of the water is gradually bringing down the bow of the vessel.
There is no way that the unsinkable Titanic can remain afloat.
10 minutes past midnight. Captain Smith has no choice. He gives the order to prepare the lifeboats. And for him, it's a real dilemma.
Smith is now in the first major accident he's ever had in his career, only the second proper accident of any sort at all. And he is now in an impossible position. He now has to abandon ship, knowing full well there are not enough lifeboats. He needs to keep calm.
There are only 1,178 places in the lifeboats, but there are 2,200 people on board. And yet, despite it not being enough, the Titanic is equipped with more lifeboats than is required by regulations.
The regulations at this time stipulate that any ship of 10,000 tons or more has to have 16 lifeboats on board. The Titanic will carry 20 lifeboats, so she actually has more than the British Board of Trade at that time required.
More than 1,000 people are at risk of drowning in the icy waters of the Atlantic. The only hope now is that a ship will soon come to the rescue.
The captain probably thought that thanks to the radio, other ships would be arriving very soon.
The radio, which until then had only been an attraction for the rich passengers, now becomes the crew's main hope. "20 minutes past midnight, the Titanic has only 2 hours to live. The radio operators begin to send distress messages to other ships in the area. The term at the time was CQD. It meant, "We are in danger, come quickly." But despite the Titanic sailing a well-traveled route, there's a problem.
The problem is that there are very few ships around that evening.
The one that could get there the fastest is the Olympic, the Titanic's twin ship which is doing the journey from the other direction. But the Olympic is far away and couldn't possibly make the journey in less than a day. So it's impossible for it to rescue the Titanic's passengers.
Contacting another ship was crucial. So the operators continue to send non-stop distress signals. And after several minutes, they even try a new code that was used more and more at the time, the SOS.
At one point Harold Bride says to Phillips, "Send an SOS, it may be our last chance to send it." So he sends out an SOS, not the first SOS in history, but certainly the most famous.
At this point, most of the passengers are unaware anything is happening, because up to now, it's mainly the technical compartments that have been affected. 25 minutes past midnight, the radio finally receives an answer. It's the Carpathia.
The Carpathia's reaction is exemplary. As soon as they get the call, they get the position, they turn the ship around and they fire up the engines, go at full steam to where the Titanic is sinking.
But the liner is 93 kilometers away and not very fast.
She's a much slower ship than Titanic, and in consequence it takes her a number of hours to get there.
The Carpathia is the Titanic's greatest hope, but it's clear that she'll be too late to save them.
45 minutes past midnight. The crew is faced with a major problem. They're having great difficulty convincing passengers that their lives are in danger.
They have no comprehension of the danger that they are in. In fact, it's even been said that the ice falling onto the ship was picked up and used as snowball fights.
What's more, the orchestra continues to play to keep the passengers from panicking. An orchestra playing. It's warm inside the ship, the lights are on, you wouldn't think there was any danger.
They completely assume that this ship will survive. That's the whole narrative that's been told to them. It's unsinkable. It's the biggest ship in the world, biggest liner in the world. You're safe on board this ship.
Despite the crew's insistence, not many passengers agreed to board the lifeboats.
Going down in a lifeboat means descending several dozen meters into very dark water that you can't even see. In total darkness, there's no moon, there's little light, the decks are dark, it's scary, and the ship still looks very stable, so why venture down there at all?
When the first lifeboat descends to starboard, it holds only 27 people, although it could have held 65.
And by the way, those who leave are making jokes, saying that if they come back without their ticket, they won't be let back on. Others are saying I had better not be late for my hair appointment tomorrow. So the atmosphere is very relaxed at the start.
Meanwhile, in the depths of the Titanic, the mood is very different. The third class is struggling to survive.
Cabins are quickly flooded, so passengers flow back towards the stern of the ship. The tragedy of this situation is that first-class passengers who were near the lifeboats wouldn't initially come on board, while third-class passengers, who quickly realized the seriousness of the ship's condition, had no access to the lifeboats, at least not at first.
And this situation is not just because of the placement of the different classes within the ship.
Third class, mostly foreigners who don't speak English. So they don't know their way around, they get lost and they want to take their suitcases with them. Because if you're one of the ultra-rich, losing your suitcase is no big deal. If you've got your entire fortune in the suitcase, well, that's another matter.
Contrary to popular belief, there are no orders to lock the third-class entrances.
There were 3 stewards who take heroic action in their search of passengers. Evidence that there was no real segregation is that, statistically, it was better to be a woman in third class than a man in first.
1 o'clock in the morning. According to Thomas Andrews's calculations, in less than an hour and a half, the Titanic would sink into the Atlantic. More and more water is rushing in. On board, everyone begins to realize the gravity of the situation.
The vessel begins to sink a little by the bow, tilting slightly to the right, in other words, starboard. So, yes, they're really starting to become aware of things and start fighting to get into the lifeboats.
The evacuation is organized in two sections, with the port lifeboats and the starboard lifeboats. Lightoller is in charge of the port lifeboats. Lightoller is very strict that it should be women and children only.
Charles Lightoller, the second officer, applies this rule very strictly. He only takes women and children, and when there are no more women and children willing to get in the lifeboat, he brings it down, even if it's far from full. Which means that we have lifeboats for around 60 people leaving with only 20 on board because they couldn't find any other women or children and didn't want to take any men.
20 minutes past 1. The Titanic has only an hour to live. The breaches are getting worse. The bulkhead of coal bunker number 6 collapses, allowing more and more water to penetrate. Partition number 6 is where the fire burned for 11 days. It's impossible not to wonder. Did the fire weaken the boat's structure? In particular, the steel plates that make up the hull and their rivets.
There is no significant consequence for the watertight bulkhead. The metal is amply strong to withstand it.
There is no evidence that the rivets had come out of the partitions, which can happen. In which case, they would have put in new rivets. They had the means. It's not a problem, but that wasn't it.
Collision with the iceberg opened such a length along Titanic that any perceived weakness in any of the bulkheads may have been irrelevant, because the sheer scale of the opening of the hull would have sunk the ship regardless.
An hour and a half. By this time, panic had spread. Even more so as the final lifeboats go down. For the passengers and crew remaining on board, there was no way out.
Many people were resigning to their fate, and there are many grave cases. Isidore and Ida Strauss, they refuse a place in the lifeboat, choosing to remain together.
The final lifeboats are over capacity. One lifeboat left at capacity of 65 people, 65 adults, but another left with 70.
For passengers unable to board a lifeboat, survival time in the icy water will not exceed 20 minutes. Especially as the disaster is set to accelerate. Two 10 a.m. The situation aboard the Titanic is more out of control than ever. In their radio booths, the two operators continue to send out SOS messages.
They are at their stations until the sea is lapping over the step of the radio room.
Because, remarkably, just as the Titanic was about to sink, it still had electricity.
It's a very brutal ending. And of course, the Titanic managed quite exceptionally, the engineers working to the last, to be fully illuminated right up to those last 2 or 3 minutes. It's a terrible sight, but many of the survivors describe that it was at the same time quite beautiful.
2:19 a.m. The weight of the water caused the bow to sink completely. The stern rises, revealing the Titanic's 3 bronze propellers.
And the stern of the ship is rising out of the water so that the ship's propellers are visible to people in the lifeboats. The ship continues to go down by the bow, and as the stern of the ship rises into the air, an enormous stress is imposed on the ship.
Imagine a ship going up. Imagine the pressure. What that actually means. It's thousands of tons.
Pulling the bow down, but at the same time, acting as a pendulum effect, the heaviest part of the vessel, of course, is where the engines are, the expansion engines and the turbines. So if you can imagine, you're ending up with a seesaw effect. As the bow begins to go below the waterline, you're ending up with a critical point here.
After a few seconds, the pressure between the 3rd and 4th funnels becomes unbearable.
It doesn't break completely. The front pulls the rear down.
Once she broke apart, the 2 sections were still attached by the double bottom, and the stern was drawn upright, ultimately breaking away. The stern, a lot of people thought we might survive by itself. Sadly, this is not to be. She turns 180 degrees, and then, to quote one of the survivors, goes down like an elevator.
It's 2:20 a.m. Both parts of the ship sink, taking the last survivors with them.
One of the most terrible things is the immediate aftermath, moments after Titanic disappears. Ava Hart, one of the more well-known survivors, said that the sound of people drowning is something that no one can ever describe. But as many survivors said, even more terrible than the screams was the silence that followed, because no one was able to do anything by that point.
For the shipwrecked survivors, a very long wait begins in the dark and icy night. It's not until 4 a.m. that the Carpathia arrives. The liner begins a particularly delicate rescue operation.
The lifeboats are lined up at the Carpathia, and the passengers are lifted up, some by rope ladders, while the weaker ones are winched up to the deck. Kids were even carried up in potato sacks.
The operation lasted 4 hours. Only 711 people survived. On the night of April 14th to 15th, 1912, over 1,500 passengers died. The 3rd class, farthest away from the lifeboats, paid the heaviest price. Where 4 out of 10 first-class travelers died, this figure is doubled for the poorer class. But the most casualties were among the crew. They include Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, the designer of the Titanic, and young radio operator Jack Phillips. The catastrophe shocked the world in the days that followed.
At first, people couldn't believe it. It's a catastrophe. It's the first technological catastrophe in history.
This is, probably the main reason why it's so famous now, the first internationally publicised disaster.
After the disaster, maritime regulations are reviewed. No ship will be allowed to sail unless it is equipped with sufficient lifeboats for all its passengers. The various investigations will also reveal something barely believable. Despite the collision with the iceberg, the Titanic could have stayed afloat.
Everything would have been different if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head-on. Why? Because the bow is always a reinforced part of the frame.
The bow section of the vessel had a thing called a collision bulkhead. We would call it in a car a crumple zone.
It would have felt the iceberg. It would have crushed the front. There would have been an impact. It would have crushed the front. There were 2 or 3 watertight compartments that would have flooded, but the ship would have stayed there.
Did Officer Murdoch make a mistake in trying to get around the iceberg?
What would one do if you were in the same situation? You're driving along the road, you see a rabbit or a cat or a dog in front of you. Your instinct is to swerve out of the way.
It's so easy to say afterwards. But when you're there, he did what seemed obvious to him.
While many doubts persist as to what really happened on the night of April 14th, 1912, one thing is for sure, and it concerns the wreck of the Titanic. Her time is running out.
It's an irony that the wreck, with so many people who were lost, a grave as many people rightly consider it, is actually teeming with life. New species of bacteria have been discovered on board, one of them, Holomonas titanicae, named after its illustrious home.
As she disappears, the Titanic will take some of her mysteries with her and continue to fuel the fascination that so many have with her.
I think the story interests people in many different ways. There is the engineering side of the story, the scientific achievement of building such a large ship in 1912. For some people, there are the stories of heroism as the ship was sinking.
It's undoubtedly a universal story that speaks to everyone. The likelihood of a story like this, of a catastrophe of this scale happening, was so weak that its potential for fascination has not yet run its course. And I don't think we've heard the last of Titanic.
There will always be interest, there will always be memory, and there will always be commemoration. And in that regard, the people involved and the ship itself will always continue throughout human recollection.
Even though her wreckage will disappear, the Titanic will be remembered as one of the most famous disasters of all time. An out-of-control catastrophe,